The air was thick with heat and the scent of old sweat, horses, and dust. The county auction grounds buzzed with laughter, deals, and the loud clanging of metal gates. Men leaned against wooden rails with sunburnt arms folded, eyes fixed on the ring, waiting for the next lot. It was the kind of place where futures were decided in a single nod, and mercy was too expensive to afford. Then came the horse that made the crowd hush, not out of awe, but disbelief. A skinny, bone-jetting creature was dragged into the auction pen, its ribs pressed visibly against a patchy coat, and its knees buckled slightly under its own weight. A limp clung to one leg. Dried blood crusted near a torn ear. Someone laughed. Another muttered, "Should have been put down." Even the auctioneer hesitated, frowning down at the paper in his hand. "Lot 72, he mumbled. 1-year-old gelding. Starting bid, 1 cent. A slow chuckle rippled through the spectators. A teenager in a baseball cap yelled, "I'll give half a cent for the glue stick." The crowd roared. From the back, a figure shifted. He didn't laugh. He didn't move quickly. He simply stepped forward into the light, filtering through the auction tent's torn canvas. He looked like a man time had forgotten. Worn boots, cracked leather belt, face like weathered wood. A cowboy hat cast a shadow over eyes that had seen too much, lost too much, and stopped pretending they hadn't. Tom Rayner. He hadn't been seen at this auction in almost a decade. Some thought he'd died. Others whispered that after the accident, after his son, he had walked away from horses forever. But here he was, eyes locked on the pathetic animal trembling in the ring. "Half a cent," Tom said quietly. The auctioneer blinked. "Sir, that was a joke." Tom lifted his chin. "Wasn't joking." A pause. Dust floated in the light between them. Then the gavel came down. "Sold. Half a cent." No applause. No congratulations. Just silence and stunned faces as Tom walked slowly to claim what looked like the most hopeless horse anyone there had ever seen. They loaded the animal into a rusted trailer attached to a truck that looked nearly as beaten down. As the wheels turned and the dust swallowed them, the laughter picked up again. But something lingered behind, the image of a broken man and a broken horse disappearing down the long dirt road. Back at Tom's land, which was more brush than pasture now, the horse collapsed as soon as its hooves touched the dry earth. For a long moment, Tom just stood there, staring down at the pile of fur and bones. No name came to mind. Not yet. A distant thunder rolled over the hills. Clouds gathered in the orange evening sky. Tom stepped forward, knelt beside the animal. His hand, rough and shaking, brushed its mane. The horse didn't flinch. It didn't do anything. "You came this far," he muttered, voice like gravel. "Don't you quit now." He rose, opened the gate to the half-rotted barn, and rigged a sling between two beams. Slowly, carefully, he slid the horse onto it, lifting it just enough to ease the weight off its legs. The process took an hour. By the time he finished, the wind had picked up, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Inside the house, peeling wallpaper curled away from walls. An old photograph sat dusty on a shelf, a young man in a racing vest beside a proud stallion, both mid-laugh. Tom didn't look at it. He poured himself a mug of stale coffee, then sat by the window and stared at the barn through the streaks of rain. He hadn't touched a horse in 9 years. Not since midnight thunder threw his boy. Not since guilt made him bury his passion, like it was the sin that had taken everything. But this animal, there had been something. Not in the way it looked, God. It looked nearly dead. But in the way it had stood there, silent, eyes open, refusing to fall while everyone mocked it. Something stubborn. Something familiar. In the dead of night, a loud crack split the air. Tom sprang from the chair, boots slamming the floor. He ran out into the storm, the rain slicing down in sheets. A tree branch had come down just feet from the barn. The horse had shifted under the sling, nostrils flaring, but it hadn't panicked. In fact, it was trying to stand, legs trembling, but there was determination in the way it fought. Tom stepped into the barn and froze. The horse's eyes met his, wide, uncertain, but burning with something he hadn't seen in a long, long time. "You stubborn cuss," Tom whispered, heart hammering. "You really want to live." He adjusted the sling, steadied the animal's legs with gentle firmness. And for the first time, the horse leaned into his touch. Tom exhaled slowly. He would call it Ash, not because of the color, but because even in ruin, it carried the spark of something still burning. That night, he sat in the straw beside Ash, back against the barn wall, rain drumming on the roof like an old heartbeat returning. He didn't speak much, just enough to let the horse hear a voice that meant no harm. "You and me," he murmured, eyes heavy with memory. "We've both been tossed aside, but I'm not done, and neither are you." Ash didn't respond, but he didn't close his eyes either. They stayed open, blinking, fixed on the dark like he was waiting for something worth staying awake for. Outside, the storm passed. Inside, for the first time in years, Tom didn't feel completely alone. And the first step, just the first step, toward redemption had been taken. Ash was standing, not fully, not steadily, but upright, his legs trembling like saplings in wind. Tom stood at the barn door that morning, coffee untouched in his hand, watching with quiet awe as the horse tested his weight, shifted, and took one uncertain step forward. 3 days had passed since the auction, and every hour had felt borrowed. Tom hadn't dared to hope, but now, watching Ash try again, fail, and then try once more, something stirred inside him, something buried deep beneath years of guilt and silence. He stepped into the barn and moved slowly, not wanting to spook the horse. Ash didn't shy away. His ears twitched, but his eyes stayed on Tom, alert yet calm. "You've got grit," Tom muttered, crouching to check the sling. "And maybe a death wish. That makes 2 of us." The corners of his mouth twitched upward, almost a smile. Tom began to reintroduce the basics, water by hand, a mixture of oats and crushed apples to tempt Ash's appetite. The horse didn't eat much at first, but he sniffed the food, nudged it, and finally began to nibble. Progress. Slow, hard-earned, but real. Each day, Tom led Ash a little farther. Just a few feet the first time. The next day, a lap around the yard. Ash's limp remained, but with every attempt, he grew more stable, his frame a little less skeletal. The sharp outline of his ribs softened, and his eyes grew brighter, watchful, calculating. Tom started talking to him more, not because he expected understanding, but because the barn had always echoed with voices once. His son's laughter, the music of hoofbeats, morning chores shared in silence. Now his voice returned like a ghost in the rafters. "You know," he said one morning, as he brushed Ash's neck, "I trained thoroughbreds once. Champions. Had a son who rode like he was born in the saddle." Ash stood still, ears flicking. Kid was fearless. Too fearless. One bad jump. One broken neck. One quiet barn for 9 long years. Tom fell silent, the brush pausing in midair. Ash turned slightly, bumping his head gently against Tom's arm, and Tom breathed. He didn't realize how badly he'd needed that gesture, a simple touch, a sign of trust from a creature that owed him nothing. But progress, like grief, never moved in a straight line. It happened during their first attempt at trotting. The yard was muddy from a light rain. Tom had fashioned a small training circle out of rope and posts. He clicked his tongue, gave Ash the cue, and the horse tried to comply. His back leg caught in the mud. He stumbled, went down hard. Tom was beside him in seconds, heart pounding as if reliving every moment of his son's fall. But Ash didn't cry out, didn't panic. He struggled to rise, breath ragged. "No, no, don't wait," Tom said, pressing a firm hand to the horse's shoulder. "Take your time." Ash grunted, his legs twitching beneath him. The fight in him was alive, but so was the fear. Tom sat down beside him in the mud. "You don't have to prove anything to me, boy," he whispered. "Not today." Ash's sides heaved, but slowly he lay still. That night, rain drummed harder on the barn roof than it had in weeks. Thunder cracked over the hills. Tom stayed in the stall with Ash, a thick blanket thrown over the horse, lantern casting long shadows. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. His mind wandered to the night it all fell apart. He had been at the track. His son, Ethan, had wanted to try a jump run with Midnight Thunder, the best horse they'd ever bred. Tom had said no. The colt was too young, too wild, too unpredictable. But he'd been too late getting home. Ethan had done it anyway. By the time Tom arrived, Midnight Thunder was fine. Ethan wasn't. One broken neck. One shattered world. No horse ever entered this barn again. Until Ash. The next morning, Tom found Ash standing on his own. A little stiff, but calm. Alive. "Guess you're too stubborn to die," he said, patting his neck. Tom resumed the training, more careful now. The circle stayed small. He broke lessons into minutes, not hours. Ash responded, not quickly, not flawlessly, but with effort, with heart. The townsfolk had started to notice. It began with whispers at the feed store. "You hear Tom Rayner bought that skeleton from the auction? I saw him walking it past the ridge. Thing's still upright somehow." By the second week, a neighbor named June stopped by the fence. "Didn't expect to see you out here, Tom," she said gently. "He looks better." Tom nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "So do I." She smiled. "About time." That night, Tom found himself looking through old boxes, photos, medals, ribbons. He hesitated at one, then pinned it to the barn wall. Ethan, atop Midnight Thunder, midair over a hurdle. Both glowing. Ash seemed to stare at it later, as if sensing something solemn in the gaze of the past. And then, one morning, it happened. Ash ran. It wasn't graceful, not yet, and certainly not fast. But in the open field behind the barn, the once rejected, half-dead gelding broke into a shaky canter. His stride was uneven, but his head lifted high. Sunlight gleamed off the copper in his coat, revealing the strength hiding beneath. Tom watched, tears stinging his eyes. Not because of what Ash was doing, but because of what it meant. Healing. Trust. A second chance. When Ash circled back to him, kicking up dust and panting with wide eyes, Tom reached out and pressed a hand to his chest. "You're ready," he whispered. "Not for races. Not yet. But for the world. And maybe, just maybe, so was he." Ash's hooves struck the earth with growing confidence. Each day his stride became longer, his frame more filled out, his spirit brighter. What once looked like a creature on the verge of death now resembled something closer to a wild Mustang, rough around the edges, but pulsing with life. Tom stood at the fence, arms resting on the top rail, watching him move. A part of him still couldn't believe it. The gelding he'd bought for half a cent had not only survived, he'd come alive. But Tom knew the world outside his land wouldn't see what he saw. That proof arrived one crisp morning, with the arrival of a red pickup truck and a man in a sheriff's hat stepping out. Sheriff Dalton. He was younger than Tom, but carried himself like someone always ready to bark an order. They weren't friends. Too much history in too small a town. Dalton tipped his hat. "Heard you've been nursing that sack of bones from the auction." Tom didn't answer immediately. He didn't like the tone. "He's got a name," he replied coolly. Dalton leaned against the fence, squinting at Ash, who stood by the trough, water dripping from his mouth. "Well, Ash or not, people are starting to talk," Dalton said. "That horse was sold as unfit for use. He wasn't even cleared by the county vet. You got him on public land, or he bolts and hurts someone. Liability's on you." Tom's jaw tightened. "He's on my land, and he's not bolting anywhere." "Still," Dalton said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "Council's asking for proof of rehabilitation. Full evaluation. They want a vet to sign off. Otherwise, he may have to be seized." Tom stared at the paper. Seized for what? Surviving. Dalton offered a shrug. Rules are rules. Tom didn't take the paper. He simply turned and walked back toward the barn. "Evaluations in 2 weeks," Dalton called after him. "Make it count, Rayner." Tom didn't respond. That evening, tension lingered like smoke in the air. Ash picked up on it. He pawed the dirt in his stall, restless. Tom leaned against the wall beside him, arms crossed. "They'd rather see you dead than wrong," he muttered. Ash whinnied low and nudged Tom's shoulder. Tom sighed. "We've come too far to stop now." From that moment on, training changed. The gentle pace gave way to a regimen built on discipline. Longer trots, steadier gallops, obstacle drills using makeshift poles and barrels. Tom spoke less and watched more, looking for signs of stress, injury, or hesitation. But Ash didn't resist. If anything, he rose to meet every challenge. Still, there were limits. The leg that once limped would never be perfect. There was a faint catch in his gait that flared after long runs. Tom adjusted routines accordingly. But deep down, he knew perfection wasn't what they needed. They needed proof of potential. One evening, after an intense session, Tom sat on the porch, rubbing his aching knee. The wind smelled of autumn, leaves, dry grass, and something else. Memories. He thought of Ethan, and how proud he'd be of Ash. How the boy would have called him a diamond in the dung heap. He chuckled quietly, then looked toward the barn. He'd have loved you, he whispered. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. June again. She leaned on the fence, holding a thermos of coffee and a camera slung over her shoulder. I want to help, she said. Tom frowned. With what? Proving he's worth something, she said. I take photos for the paper. People listen more when they see for themselves. Let me tell his story. Tom hesitated. His instinct was to keep Ash and himself away from the world that had already turned its back on them. But hiding hadn't helped either of them heal. All right, he said. One photo. No flash. She nodded. That afternoon, June knelt in the grass as Ash trotted through the golden light of sunset. The wind caught his mane. His coat glowed. He's beautiful, she murmured, clicking the shutter. You saved him, Tom. Tom's voice came low. No, he saved me. A week before the evaluation, Tom called in a favor. Dr. Havers, a semi-retired vet who had once helped deliver Midnight Thunder, agreed to take a look. The vet took his time, running his hands along Ash's legs, checking his teeth, eyes, and lungs. He stood back, arms folded, watching the horse move in the training ring. Well, Tom asked, guarded. Havers didn't answer right away. He scribbled something on a clipboard. Your gelding's got a slight limp, an old injury that won't go away. But his vitals are strong. He's alert, responsive, no infection, good appetite. Tom waited. He's no racer, Havers continued. But he's sound. He's safe. Tom exhaled. Put that in writing. Havers handed him the form. With pleasure. The paper trembled slightly in Tom's hands. Not from fear, relief. Validation. That night, Tom tacked up Ash for the first time. The saddle was old, leather cracked, but it still fit. He didn't climb aboard. Not yet. He just walked beside him, hand on the reins, feeling the rhythm of each step. Ash didn't flinch, didn't falter. They stopped beneath the stars. Tom ran a hand down the horse's neck. We're not done, partner, he said softly. Not by a long shot. And for the first time in years, he felt ready to move forward. One step, one stride, one breath at a time. The morning of the evaluation arrived with a sky washed in pale gold, soft clouds drifting like held breath. Tom stood at the stable gate, hat low over his brow, eyes fixed on Ash as he chewed his hay, with calm precision. The barn was silent but full, of memories, of hope, of pressure. Ash had no idea what the day meant, but Tom did. He moved slowly as he prepped the gelding, brushed him until his copper coat gleamed, cleaned his hooves, adjusted the halter. Every touch was gentle, yet carried weight, like a man saying goodbye, just in case. You just be yourself out there, he murmured. That's enough. A truck rumbled down the gravel path. Dust curled in its wake. Sheriff Dalton stepped out first, followed by 2 county officials and a woman in a crisp blue jacket, Dr. Avery, the new state-licensed evaluator. Tom met them at the gate, nodding once. No pleasantries were exchanged. Let's get to it, Dr. Avery said, eyes scanning the paddock. Ash stood quietly as she approached. She was professional, methodical. Checked teeth, eyes, spine. Ran fingers down his legs. He shifted once, but didn't protest. Tom watched everything. He looks better than I expected, she said without looking up, still compensating slightly on the left hind. He was nearly dead when I bought him, Tom replied. I know, she said. That's what makes this interesting. She stepped back. Walk him. Tom led Ash through the paddock, slow and steady. They moved like one. After a full circle, she nodded. Now trot. Tom gave the cue. Ash hesitated, then obeyed. His gait wasn't perfect, but it was clean, controlled. His head stayed level. He moved with effort, yes, but also with purpose. When they returned, Dr. Avery consulted her clipboard. Sheriff Dalton crossed his arms. So, she didn't answer immediately. Then, he's sound enough for light work. Fit for non-competitive use. Definitely not a danger to others. No need for seizure. Tom blinked. Wait, you mean? She nodded. He passes. For a moment, Tom couldn't speak. The weight of 9 years, of regret and grief and isolation, lifted. Not completely, but enough for the light to break through. Sheriff Dalton cleared his throat, clearly displeased but unable to argue. Congratulations, Dr. Avery said, almost warmly. You gave him a second chance. Tom looked at Ash. He gave me one. They left not long after, leaving dust and silence behind. Tom stood beside Ash, brushing a hand down his neck. The breeze stirred, warm and full of promise. We did it, boy. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, Tom received a letter in the mail, handwritten, stamped from another county. He opened it with cautious fingers. It was from a children's writing center, written by June's niece, who had seen Ash's story in the local paper. They were looking for calm, rehabilitated horses to help children with disabilities, ones with gentle temperaments and resilience. Ash's story had moved them. Would he consider bringing Ash down for a trial session? Tom sat with the letter for a long time, folded and unfolded it, read it twice, then 3 times. Then he walked out to the pasture. Ash stood under the oak tree, tail swishing gently, watching butterflies rise from the grass. Tom approached, reached out, and scratched behind his ear. What do you say, partner? He said softly. You up for helping someone else find their legs again? Ash blinked, then nudged him gently in the chest. Tom smiled. 2 weeks later, Ash stepped off a trailer into a sun-dappled arena, surrounded by children, some in wheelchairs, others with braces or crutches. Their eyes lit up at the sight of him. Tom led him forward. Slowly, carefully. A boy named Micah reached out, hand trembling. Ash lowered his head and nuzzled the boy's fingers with astonishing tenderness. Micah laughed. Tom hadn't heard a sound so pure in years. That afternoon, Ash carried 3 children, each for just a few slow, steady laps. No one rushed. No one fell. And when it was over, one of the mothers pulled Tom aside, tears in her eyes. Your horse, she whispered, gave my son the courage to try again. Tom felt the lump rise in his throat. It wasn't about redemption anymore. It was about passing it on. Later, as the sun sank and shadows grew long, Tom sat alone beside Ash, watching the children pack up. You were never broken, he said quietly, just waiting to be seen. Ash stood tall, ears forward, eyes bright, and for the first time in a decade, Tom didn't feel like a man haunted by what he'd lost. He felt like a man living again, with a friend beside him, a future ahead, and nothing left to fear.